Russian President Vladimir Putin appears composed as ever, flanked by senior ministers and advisers. Facing reporters, he addresses the latest move from Washington, a new round of US sanctions that target Russia's two largest oil giants, Rosneft and Lukoil. His tone is measured, his words deliberate. Now, regarding the new US sanctions, he begins, firstly, there is nothing new here. Yes, they are certainly serious for us, that's clear, and they will have certain consequences, but they will not significantly affect our economic well-being. It is the first public reaction from the Kremlin since the United States imposed its most far-reaching economic penalties since President Donald Trump returned to office earlier this year. In Washington, officials describe the measures as a calibrated strike against what they call the financial backbone of Moscow's war economy. In Moscow, they are portrayed as just another test, one that Russia says it is fully prepared to endure. For decades, the Kremlin has treated Western sanctions as both an obstacle and a badge of resilience. From 2014's response to the annexation of Crimea to the sweeping restrictions after the Ukraine conflict, Russia has learned to adapt, redirect, and survive. This time, Putin wants the world to see that pattern continuing. The sanctions announced this week freeze the US-based assets of Rosneft and Lukoil and prohibit American firms from doing business with them. Together, these companies produce nearly half of Russia's crude oil output, the lifeblood of its state budget and the source of much of its global leverage. Analysts estimate that energy exports account for nearly a third of federal revenues, funding everything from pensions to defense spending. That is what makes the latest measures so symbolic. Washington has struck directly at the heart of Russia's economic machine, but Putin insists the machine will keep running. For years, Russia has cultivated alternative trade routes, redirecting crude toward Asia, establishing barter deals with India and China, and experimenting with settlement in yuan, rupees, and even cryptocurrencies. State banks have been gradually disconnected from Western systems, forcing the development of domestic payment networks. These changes, once viewed as defensive, now serve as insulation. Economists in Moscow argue that the sanctions' real effect may be psychological rather than structural. They rattle investors and complicate transactions, but they are unlikely to bring the economy to its knees. The Russian ruble briefly dipped after the announcement, only to recover as energy traders reassessed the limited scope of the measures. In the Kremlin's view, this resilience is a political statement. By staying calm and unflinching, Putin projects continuity and control, the twin pillars of his leadership style. To his domestic audience, it is reassurance. To foreign observers, a message of defiance. But beneath the composure lies a more complex reality. Russia's energy sector is still dependent on imported technology for exploration and drilling, and its insurance and shipping rely on networks that intersect with Western finance. Each new restriction forces the industry to improvise, and every workaround comes at a cost. Still, the president's message today was one of confidence. He reminded reporters that the country's reserves now exceed $600 billion, a cushion built during years of high oil prices. He noted that Russia has recorded consecutive trade surpluses and that domestic production of food and manufactured goods has reached what he called strategic sufficiency. The statement also carries political weight abroad. For Trump's administration, it is a signal that Washington intends to draw sharper lines after months of uneven diplomacy. In his own briefing, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the sanctions target critical revenue streams that enable Moscow's military aggression and pledged continued coordination with European allies. But in Brussels, the European Union has not yet joined this package. Officials there say further steps will be discussed within the G7. Across Asia, reaction has been cautious. Beijing reiterated its opposition to what it called unilateral coercive measures, while India's energy ministry said it would review any implications for its imports. Oil markets responded instantly. Prices climbed nearly 2% as traders weighed the risk of disruptions. Inside Russia, the story is being told very differently. Evening Talk shows emphasize endurance and sovereignty. Headlines describe the sanctions as another Western attempt to contain a rising power. Putin's own framing fits neatly into that narrative, portraying Russia not as isolated, but as a nation forging its own path under pressure. The speech lasted only a few minutes, but its echoes will last far longer. Every word was chosen to balance realism with reassurance. When Putin says the sanctions are serious, he acknowledges their weight. When he adds that they will not significantly affect our economic well-being, he asserts control over the story. That balance, and between acknowledgement and defiance, has become a hallmark of his communication strategy. It is designed for multiple audiences, domestic, regional, and global. To Russians at home, it conveys that the government is unshaken. To allies abroad, it signals stability. And to Washington, it draws a line between pressure and persuasion. In practice, the impact may take months to gauge. Rosneft and Lukoil have extensive global operations, including refineries and trading hubs that operate through subsidiaries beyond US jurisdiction. Their executives insist business will continue as usual, emphasizing that most of their exports already avoid Western markets. Rosneft chief Igor Sechin released a brief statement saying operations remain in full compliance with national legislation and existing contracts. Lukoil described itself as a private company unfairly caught in geopolitical crossfire. Both statements were designed to calm shareholders and employees and to echo the Kremlin's tone of resilience. For the Russian leadership, these challenges are not just about economics, they are about narrative control. Each new sanction, each diplomatic clash becomes proof, in the Kremlin's telling, that the West fears Russia's independence. This idea of encirclement of a nation tested and triumphant is central to Putin's political identity. Throughout his presidency, he has drawn parallels between modern sanctions and the struggles of earlier Russian history, from the Soviet years to the hardships of the 1990s. By invoking endurance, he turns economic isolation into a story of national pride. Yet behind the symbolism, ordinary Russians continue to feel the effects. Imported goods are more expensive. Some medicines are harder to find. Travel and investment opportunities have narrowed. Still, public polls suggest that a majority of citizens blame the West, not the Kremlin, for those difficulties, a sentiment shaped by years of state media messaging. Outside observers note that Russia's economic model has changed since 2022. Government spending now leans heavily on defense and infrastructure, while social programs lag. The country's pivot to Asia is accelerating. Trade with China is at record levels, and settlements in yuan have surpassed those in euros. This adaptation keeps the system running, but it also deepens dependence on a limited group of partners. For now, the Kremlin is confident that its internal stability is intact. The central bank continues to intervene in currency markets when needed. Gold and foreign reserves remain strong. And despite reduced access to Western technology, domestic industries have found substitutes, often through parallel imports or friendly intermediaries. All of this forms the backdrop to Putin's statement today. His brief remarks may sound routine, but they are carefully designed to send a message that Russia will not bend under economic coercion and that its leadership will continue to present strength in the face of isolation. Observers recall that during past crises, such as the 2014 oil price crash or the 2022 sanctions wave, the Kremlin initially adopted the same tone, calm on the surface, meticulous behind the scenes. Today's declaration fits that mold perfectly. In geopolitical terms, this confrontation between Washington and Moscow has entered a new phase. The Trump administration's return to sanctions marks a shift from the dialogue attempts seen earlier in the year. For US policymakers, it is an assertion of control. For Russia, it is an opportunity to showcase self-reliance and project endurance. Around the world, governments are watching closely, not just to gauge the impact on Russia, but to see how far Washington's strategy will go. If the measures remain limited to the oil sector, global markets may stabilize. If they expand to technology or banking, the repercussions could ripple far wider. Within Russia's borders, life moves on. Factories hum, trains roll across Siberia, and oil tankers leave Arctic ports for Asia. To the Kremlin, this continuity is the ultimate proof that sanctions, however severe, cannot break the rhythm of the state. Still, even Putin's allies admit that the challenges are cumulative. Each new restriction adds friction, another complication in financing, shipping, or sourcing spare parts. The question is not whether Russia can survive, but how much economic vitality it will sacrifice along the way. For now, the president is betting on time and on the belief that fatigue will eventually soften Western resolve. He has said repeatedly that sanctions hurt those who impose them as well, driving up energy costs and dividing markets. And as long as the Russian budget remains balanced and oil continues to flow, he can point to numbers as evidence that his strategy works. The cameras lingered as Putin left the hall, his expression unchanged. Outside, Moscow's skyline glowed against the evening haze. State television replayed his quote on every channel. "They are certainly serious for us, but they will not significantly affect our economic well-being." For his supporters, it was proof of composure. For his critics, denial. For the world, another reminder that Russia's economic confrontation with the West is far from over. In this latest chapter of sanctions and counter-sanctions, neither side seems ready to back down. Washington insists pressure will continue until Moscow changes course. Moscow insists it will never yield to foreign dictates. Between those two positions lies the uneasy balance that defines global politics today. And so the story ends as it began, with the image of a president unmoved, a nation under pressure but unbroken, and an economy that for now still stands. From Moscow, this is the picture of defiance. One leader, one message, and one enduring belief that Russia's strength lies not in avoidance of hardship, but in its ability to withstand it.